Hi there. It's day 2 of the Sunny Balwani trial, and they're still picking a jury. So I'm going to give you the highlights of what happened today in court. We're going to talk about why jurors are being asked about their relationship, why they're being asked questions in chambers, why some jurors are being excused, others are not, and why an attorney may be in trouble. And I'm not talking about the attorneys in this case. I'm talking about an attorney who didn't show up for jury duty. And we all know as citizens, it's our civic responsibility as Americans to show up when we're summoned for jury duty, right? And we all know that we could be held in contempt of court. And when you're an attorney, that's not a good thing. Anyway, so who am I? I'm Michele Hagan. I'm an attorney and a legal analyst and a former prosecutor. And you may recognize me because I provided a lot of coverage on the Elizabeth Holmes case. Sunny Balwani is co-defendant of Elizabeth Holmes. He's facing the exact same charges that she did, charges relating to defrauding investors and defrauding patients. And I can tell you, having done a boatload of trials myself and trained a lot of lawyers, picking a jury is definitely the most important part of a trial, because who you get on that panel matters. They're the ones who make the decision on whether or not your client is guilty or not guilty. So it's really important, this process. It's a critical process of asking these jurors questions to find out, do they have any bias? Because the Sixth Amendment of the United States Constitution guarantees every defendant the right to a fair trial. And that means that every one of these jurors is impartial. They don't have a bias against the defendant or the government. And that's why the attorneys are given the opportunity to ask questions. The judge asks questions, whether or not they have a bias, whether or not they can be impartial. In other words, objective, not bring in any outside evidence, or whether they saw a program on CNN or Hulu regarding the dropout, or any other TED Talk relating to the Holmes case, Theranos, regarding Sunny Balwani. All of that is not, they're not supposed to be considering that. They're only supposed to be making, the jurors are only supposed to be making their decision based on the evidence that comes into that case, into Sunny Balwani's case, right? All the other stuff needs to stay out, okay? They're only supposed to consider the evidence that's presented in the Sunny Balwani trial and the law that applies. That's what they're supposed to make their decision on. That's why it's really important. That's why we ask questions of jurors. And I know it annoys you when you guys show up for jury and we're asking you all these questions and we're prying. I get it, but we have to make sure that we get impartial jurors. All right. So let's talk about what's happened today. So we had, I'll just give you an overview of some of these jurors. We had a juror who's a secretary in an elementary school. She has a medical condition, so I think she's probably going to be excused. We have another woman who's pregnant, approximately, I'm guessing, around 20 weeks. She may or may not get excused. I don't know yet. We also have another potential juror who is a forensic accountant who is retained by Balwani's counsel's firm, but he says he can be impartial. So if I was the prosecutor, I'd be asking him questions, right? So we have many of the jurors raise their hand. They said they know about the Holmes case, the Theranos case, and Sunny Balwani, because they saw something on NPR or on, they watched The Dropout on Hulu. I also saw some stuff on HBO. Some of them saw a 60-minute special on this Theranos. And we have one juror who did do some research, was interested in the Holmes case, right? So did research on Theranos, and was asked whether they could be impartial, responded, it may be an issue. Okay, well, right there, you need to ask this juror more questions, because it may be an issue. No, you want to make sure they can unequivocally say to you, I can be impartial, right? Because otherwise, you're not getting an impartial juror. All right. So we also have another juror who saw some of the coverage on the Holmes case on CNN, and when asked, they responded, headlines are headlines, and headlines are not the whole story. So that's letting us know that this juror is going to have an open mind. We need to find jurors who can have an open mind, right? Who don't come in with prejudging the case. All right, we have another one who followed it quite a bit in Mercury News, and a shout out to Mercury News, which is a local publication in San Jose, California, in that area, which is where the Holmes trial was held. That juror said that they could be impartial, right? We have another juror who was, let's see, we have 8 jurors who are being asked independently, usually outside of the presence of other jurors, about their relationships, whether or not they were asked whether they had difficulty in their relationships, and 8 of them said yes. And why is that important? Why are these jurors being asked? Why are they being asked about their relationships, whether they had difficulty in relationship? Any guesses? They're being asked that because in the press, right, in the media was reported, and also in the Holmes trial, I was there when Elizabeth Holmes was on the stand testifying, talking about how she'd been abused by Sunny, you know. So the defense wants to make sure that none of these jurors are going to hold that against. Again, there were allegations, right? There were allegations. The Holmes juror and the Balwani jury is not going to be asked to find whether or not Sunny Balwani abused, right? That's not what he's being charged with. Okay, he's being charged with fraud, defrauding investors or patients. But we want to know as attorneys whether or not you as a juror can set aside any difficulties you had in your relationship and basically not hold this against Sunny Balwani, right? Considering stuff that he's not being charged with. And again, it's allegations, right? And I still need to do a video on whether or not the evidence that they presented in the Holmes case, what does that say, whether or not she was abused or not? And you can go ahead and look at the video I did do on the text between Sunny and Elizabeth Holmes, and you can decide whether or not you think there was an abusive relationship. Okay, but we're putting that aside. Let's get back to the jury. All right, so 8 jurors are going to be asked questions about the relationship by the judge, and they usually do that in chambers, right? Because for privacy reasons, you know, you don't want to be doing this in open court, so to speak, right? You don't want to make these jurors feel uncomfortable. You know, it's stressful enough for jurors to show up, right? They don't want to have their personal lives being pried. In any way, so okay, let's see who else. The judge did excuse a juror for hardship. This was the juror that was concerned about being able to pick up his child because he was the only one who could. He or she was the only one. He was worried if he didn't show up for jury duty, he might get arrested. Yeah, when you get a summons to show up for jury duty, official summons from the court, from federal court, you should show up, right? We're going to find out if the judge calls out that attorney who didn't show up for jury duty. Okay, let's see. We also have another juror who watched the Erica Chung TED Talk. You know, Erica Chung is probably going to be called as a witness in Balwani's case. She's probably going to give similar testimony, you know, regarding whether or not the technology worked, right? And then let's see, we have a chiropractor, a prospective juror who's a chiropractor, and she said that her background as a healthcare provider could color her judgment against Balwani. Quote, "It's my lane, it's what I do, and I think it's important to uphold that moral and ethical code. And yes, I do have a problem when people don't do that." So this chiropractor juror, potential juror, is telling us attorneys that she is not going to be able to be impartial, right? So you're going to want to ask her questions. Can she be impartial? Even with that experience of it being, you know, she's a healthcare provider, can she set that aside and judge this case based on the testimony and the evidence that's presented? If she can't, then she would be excused. And so all of these questions that these jurors are being asked, both sides are trying to discover whether or not you have a bias. If you have a bias, you can't be impartial. And if you have a bias, these jurors can be excused for cause, right? because they can't be impartial. Then the next step is whether or not these jurors can be excused challenged. It's called peremptory challenge. So either side has a certain amount of peremptory challenges where they can just excuse jurors without giving a reason. So we're not at that stage yet. We're at the first stage of, I'll call it bias elimination. We're trying to get rid of jurors who may have a bias against our client, whether it's the government or whether it's Sunny Balwani. Okay, is everybody following? I hope so. All right, so yeah, so we're going to find out whether or not those 8 jurors that are being asked, about their relationships, whether or not they're going to be excused because of a potential bias, or whether they're going to be making it to round 2, I'll call it round 2, where they could be challenged for any reason. Okay, so that'll be based on the attorneys asking. Both sides will have an opportunity to ask the jurors additional questions to find out whether or not there's any other reason they want to have them challenged. And again, this is the most important point of a trial, is who you pick, right? And you have to pay attention. There's so much I could talk about here, and there's so much wisdom we gain after you do so many trials, all right? That you know how to pay attention to, what are the dynamics of the jury going to be? You want a cohesive, can I talk? You want a cohesive group that can work together and come to a decision, right? A decision to convict, a decision to acquit, or you want, one juror. All Sunny Balwani needs is one juror, because it has to be a unanimous, all 12 have to vote to convict him, right? Or, if he has one juror, just like in the Elizabeth Holmes case on those 3 investor counts where they couldn't come to a decision, that you have to have all 12. All 12 have to decide that he's guilty, right? All they need is one juror who doesn't vote for guilt, or several jurors who don't vote for guilt. Then you don't have a conviction. Okay. All right. So let's see what happens tomorrow. Tomorrow's another day, and it's probably going to take, oh, I forgot to mention, the prosecutor is asking, I think this is an interesting question, is asking the jurors if they have an addiction to social media. In other words, would they have a hard time dealing with a news blackout? That means, when they go home, they can't be watching the news, right? They can't be on their social media. They can't be reading the newspapers. Anybody do that anymore? But you know what I'm saying? They have to not pay attention to any media coverage, right? Because they're worried about them being influenced, right, by the media. Because again, it's back to what I said earlier. They're only supposed to make the decision on the evidence and the testimony that comes in that courtroom, right? Not on some talking head on the news, or even somebody like me, right? They need to make their decision based on the evidence and the testimony that they hear in the Balwani case. All right, so I think that's probably enough. Thank you to everybody who subscribed and for supporting my work. I really appreciate it. Let's get some more subscriptions. I would love to be doing some live streams down the road, okay? So I can interact with you instead of just talking, right? So please share this video, please like it, and please leave your comments and questions. They're great. You guys have been asking me great questions. And yes, they will get a jury. Don't worry. In these high publicity cases, it takes a little time to screen the jurors and to, make sure that everybody understands you're not supposed to be considering what's going on outside, right? It's only what each side proves, right? In this case, whatever the evidence is. All right. So again, please share, like, and leave a comment, and do subscribe. And thank you very much for watching.